Hey there, I'm just a generalist, and welcome back to Road to 100. Now, I figured that if I'm going to tackle making 100 pieces of art, I need to break it down into more sizable pieces so as to feel like I'm actually making some progress. So, I came up with 10 ideas to make in this series: animal portraits, Art Nouveau, typography, Japanese posters, matchboxes, Celtic patterns, continuous line art, paper cutout, isometric biomes, and symmetrical art. I'm not gonna lie, some of these make me a bit nervous. I've practiced some of these before, but a lot of it is going to be new ground for me. I know it's not exactly the smartest move, but it wouldn't be me if it wasn't at least a little bit ambitious, right? So hell, let's kill two birds with one stone and give it a shot. Fingers crossed, right? Anyways, let's begin with the first-ish piece for my first design series, animal portraits. Right from the jump, I made sure to sketch out a completed drawing with all the details I wanted to put into my final design. I drew with tone paper to figure out the values before I went into Illustrator. I would have liked to show y'all the whole process, if not for my phone just deciding to give up on me halfway through the recording. I can't explain why either, since it blindsided me halfway in. I was really looking forward to showing y'all how I made it, cause I was pretty proud of this little whale pic. Still though, the art itself turned out okay, so hey, you win some, you lose some. So right after that little stumbling, I went in guns blazing into Illustrator. My goal was to finish this whale design faster than I did my wolf picture from way back. And no joke, I even made a checklist right before I started. Here, I'll show you. It was all plotted out step by step, from the whale, then the background, to all the little details in between. When I made this, I wasn't really sure how much it would help to put such a rigid system into my art process. But the crazy thing is, it worked for me. As best I can remember, the wolf took over a week to finish, but I ended up finishing this whale in 3 days. I think what made the difference was that I'll usually be jumping from one area to the next, working on what I felt like doing at that moment. It never really occurred to me before that that method could be a problem for me, but now that I'm giving myself deadlines, I can see a need for a little more efficiency in my art process. I liked having a game plan. It was satisfying to see all my objectives get knocked out one by one. When in no time, I went from a sketch to an outline to coloring pretty easily. Knocking out the outline was quick and easy, but figuring out the color palette was a bit of a puzzle. The solution to said puzzle was just dumb luck, really. I got started by borrowing the base color from one of the pictures I had as reference. For the shadows, I just took that same color and made it a bit darker. The only part I put any real thought into was the highlights. I was going to go for a really bright blue, but with the blue sky and the blue ocean, I figured I should probably change it up in order for the whale to stand out. I stumbled upon this bright, minty, bluish green that I really like, so I just kind of threw it in there. I know on the surface it sounds like I'm being lazy, but trust me, when you see where I really put all my mental energy, you'll understand why I tend to think like this. With all the larger features figured out, I then moved on to the finer points. I tend towards realism as a style, so nailing all these little particulars just kind of comes with the territory. Still though, I tend to get wrapped up in these details rather easily, and as a consequence, I lose a lot of time. Honestly, I'd rather not show them cause, I'm not gonna lie, I kinda just sorta sped through a couple of these and it feels like I'm putting a spotlight on all the little problems you can find in my picture. And to put it bluntly, I really hate it. Still, despite all that, I'm really satisfied with the whale, and it only took me 3 hours total to finish him. So all in all, that went really well for the first day. If only I could say the same for the rest of them. Now, in the beginning, everything was going fine. I put in the background elements and masked it into this nice little vignette. By this point, the picture is more or less done, and I just needed to add the finer details to complete it. Outside of a little uncertainty with the shape of the cloud, everything's going smoothly, right? Well, that's where it all starts going wrong. To put into perspective the nonsense that's about to happen, it took me 3.5 hours to finish 95% of the picture. And it took me 4.5 hours to finish the last 5%. This is my story. So back to that cloud. I look at it, and for the life of me, I just don't like the look of it. So I go back and I try all sorts of things. Maybe I can adjust the shape of the cloud on the fly and see if it works out. And I don't like it. Okay, cool. Maybe I can try copying a part of the clouds in one of my references. And that doesn't work either. Alright, fine. Maybe I can alter that shape to fit my picture better. It looks worse. Fantastic. Okay, maybe I can readjust its position within the mask to trim out the parts I don't like. And I did like it. For a minute. And before I realized it, I had already started to play the but maybe game. For those who don't know, the but maybe game is a train of thought wherein anytime you make a decision, your brain goes, but maybe, and convinces you to try something else even though the first choice was perfectly fine. It's a mentality that can make you second guess and overthink any and every small detail to an irrational degree. In my personal experience, the cause stems from anxiety over other people judging your work poorly based on minor mistakes that only you can see. And in an attempt to prevent this from happening, you overwork yourself physically and mentally in order to, as the saying goes, put your best foot forward. The worst part about this mentality is that on occasion it can produce the results you wanted. The trade-off though is that those results came at the cost of your own mental and physical well-being. It can be very easy to fall into that no pain, no gain justification, but art isn't like exercise. You shouldn't be in pain to progress as an artist. Ironically enough, said pain can lead to burnout, which will require a recovery time longer than if the person had just paced themselves properly in the first place. Ultimately, there is no winning in the but maybe game, as no matter what you do, you'll still see all those small imperfections that you were trying to avoid. But good luck telling me that at the time, because by the end of day 2, I was knee deep in this mentality with next to nothing to show for it. No matter how I look at it, day 2 was just a waste of time. I barely accomplished anything for that day, and I spent a lot of time and energy just running around in circles. The most frustrating thing about it is that I could have finished this whole thing earlier if I had just paced myself better. But due to falling prey to the but maybe game, I ended up spending most of that day just recovering from the headache that it gave me. Alright, so I slept on it, I got some rest, I'm back on the saddle. And no matter what, I'm finishing this project today. And hey, after all the stress of yesterday behind me, obviously I learned my lesson and get this wrapped up without issue. And if you honestly believe that, you clearly have not been paying enough attention. So, let's talk about the seafoam. I managed to make a couple of brushes yesterday so that I didn't have to do all of it by hand. My problem with the seafoam was trying to figure out how to translate what I drew for reference into digital form. I couldn't do the shading like in the sketch, so I went with trying to replicate how the foam would look like in real life. For a minute, that worked. And by that, I mean it worked for a whole minute. So right away, I started finding problems with how I grouped the foam, so I tried like 20 different combinations that all basically amounted to nothing. On one hand, I wanted to show off the sea foam since it's key to showing the motion of the whale, but on the other hand, I didn't want to cover up the details on the whale. Since I couldn't come up with an answer, I briefly gave up on it thinking it's useless to stress myself out over all these little details. Only to go and stress out over some other little details. So I gave shading the cloud another shot. In fact, I gave it a half a dozen different shots before I got fed up with that part of the picture too. So I gave that up and moved on ahead to the mountain. At the time, I wanted to use shadows to make roads and walkways to suggest that it was inhabited. Problem was, I just couldn't think up any good shadow shapes, and just like everything else, I got fed up with that stupid mountain too. I was just done by that point, but I refused to just quit when I knew I could finish this well by that day. So I was just stuck there with my frustrations. And then something happened. By some miracle, an epiphany struck me. And by epiphany, I mean the obvious. And I stepped back and asked myself this. What is the art style that you're going for? You see, at some point before I realized it, I had forgotten the art style that I chose for this series. My style for the animal portraits takes inspiration from wood print and lino cut. It's supposed to have a limited color palette and rendering. I was so busy trying to recreate the look of charcoal on paper and the look of real life that I forgot that I was going for a completely different style than either of those. And suddenly, it all started making sense again. I decided after tampering so much with the sea foam on the mouth that I should tackle working on the sea foam at the break of the water. Instead of covering it with dots like I did at the top of the whale, I went with a solid, unified shape that conveyed the energy of the whale breaking the surface. This then made me think of the Waves picture by Hokusai, and I wanted to replicate his use of a slightly darker shade to get the bottom of the foam some depth. And just like that, I was on a roll. I realized there was no point in adding more detail to the background since it worked better to contrast its simplicity with the whale's details. I tried to have the drapes match the carpet and changed up the foam at the top of the whale to be closer to what I had going on at the bottom. I went back and forth over deciding whether or not I should just throw away all that hard work I did with the prior foam, or if I should just add it on top of the extra stuff I made. In the end, I compromised and kept the original foam but streamlined it along the whale's mouth. From there, I added some lines to suggest clear water running down the whale's figure and experimented with adding a shadow. It didn't go quite as I wanted it to, so I just ditched it. The last bit of detail I added in was the lines on the ocean. I wanted to replicate the different shades of water and show how the light hits parts of the water differently in certain areas. In the end, I came up with this line to represent those parts of the water that end up catching more light and spread them across the picture. By the end of it, I did get the urge again to keep tampering with some more details in the background. I almost went back to playing the game again, but thankfully, I was just tired enough to regain my senses and called it finished right there. When I look back at my performance for this specific project, it reminds me of this video I watched some time ago. It was by this guy named Strufless, and in it, he talks about the reason why some people, especially artists, tend to be procrastinators. Essentially, it all boils down to this desire for perfection, or in reality, an avoidance of shame. The effort of transferring these perfect thoughts to a perfect paper transformed what was once a process of expression and creative growth into an opportunity for stress and second guessing. He introduces the 70% rule, which basically boils down to finding that level of quality that's good enough to be comfortable with instead of chasing absolute perfection. At the end there, I really did have to tell myself that I did reach that good enough. Like he said in his video, that doubt that compels you to play the but maybe game, it exists from start to finish, and going forward, I want to be able to snap out of it sooner than I did with this project. Because it's very clear to me that the biggest thing stopping me from finishing my work sooner was not a lack of effort, but an overabundance of it. Alright, here it is, the first-ish artwork in my animal series. It should be up on the shop as of this video's release. Let's give some love to the artist whose work I referenced in the process of making this design. Links to their social media are in the description. I'll also be linking the Strufless video so you can see it and any of his other videos if you're feeling interested. Oh, also, special shout out to me, cause like a dummy, I forgot to actually put the link to my shop in the description last time. So come find me on Redbubble. You don't have to buy anything, but it is free to stop on by. With all that being said, thanks for watching my video. Hope to see you again.